Hello and welcome to Dark Souls. I'm going to play through Dark Souls and talk about everything that interests me, from design to roleplay to lore to whatever. To give this a little bit of a swirl, I'm going to do double trouble. So there's going to be two characters and we're going to play through it twice and switch between them to see what the differences between two playthroughs can be. Okay, so I hope you enjoy very much and I'll see you in game. Alright, so our first character is going to be a female thief named Hope with the gift of twin humanities. As you can see, her face is from royalty, and that'll play a bit of a role in how she reacts to everything inside the Dark Souls world. Now we're going to watch the first actual cutscene of the game, and as you'll know, Dark Souls has very few cutscenes, so watch this carefully. I'll explain some shit afterwards. Our second character is going to be a wanderer named Jack. He's kind of been lost throughout his life, and that'll show as he finds his way in the Dark Souls universe.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arched trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death. And of course, light and dark. Then from the dark, they came and found the souls of lords within the flame. Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Gwyn's mighty gods peeled apart their stone skills. The witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath, the Scaleless, betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers. And man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side.
Okay, so that was a lot. Let's go through it one by one. First, there was just dragons. who lived peacefully. At least, that's what I think they did. Anyway, after a while, suddenly there was fire. And from fire came the great lords. First of all, Nito, the first of the dead, the Witch of Izalith, harnessing the flame, and Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. Finally, there was the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. There's a lot of debate over who this actually is, but for our story, it's not important. After that, you see that these lords challenge dragons and eventually defeat them with the help of Seath, the Scaleless. Once they've defeated them, an age of man comes in, of light and prosperity. An empire is built, and this is the empire that you will explore through your travels. They then explain about the dark sign, and about how people cannot die anymore, and they just go hollow and slowly lose their sanity. This is a very important and interesting part of the game, since it means that death is actually canonical, meaning that if you die in Dark Souls, the story doesn't end. The story just continues with you waking up at the bonfire. Whether in other games, usually if you die, the story is cut and you're set back at the checkpoint and the story continues from there. This is something very important to the Dark Souls lore and mythos, and really enforces the idea of dread and people losing all hope. Okay, so our story starts with us locked up in a cell, and some dude dropping down a random corpse with a key on it. We're then easily tutorialized and see some big bad enemy that is apparently guarding this asylum. After exploring for a bit, we find our first bonfire. There's an actual great environmental clue you can see here on the top of that door that shows you that there's actually a boss coming up. Dark Souls does loads of these cool things that show you what's coming up and tips you off on there is traps, which makes it actually a very fair game in my opinion. The boss drops down and we avoid it. Thing is, Dark Souls always plays by its own rules, so if it drops an early boss on you, you are still able to beat it, even though you're not supposed to, and you're even rewarded for doing so by getting a cool weapon. We then have this boring tutorial moment where you learn how to block arrows and attack your first enemy. After that, we see another environmental clue, where you can see through this hole in the wall that there's actually an item over there. Trying to get that item doesn't net you any results, but it still clues you off that there's actually more to do here, and that maybe you'll come back here afterwards. We then get into our first trap, which is actually completely visible from the bottom of the stairs. As this trap goes off, it hits through a wall, a room reveals itself, and within it, you'll find Oscar. Oscar will be your first guide throughout the game. He'll give you your Estus flask and a key to the next part of the asylum. He'll also tell you about ringing the Bell of Awakening, your first goal in the game. Afterwards, you beat some more enemies and come back to this asylum demon. You destroy it, and then you're taken to Lordran by a bird. This is where the main part of the game will take place.
In the ancient legends, it is stated that one day an undead shall be chosen. To leave the undead asylum in pilgrimage to the land of the ancient lords. Lordran.
The moment you get into Lordran, the game prompts you to level up at Firelink Shrine. You'll probably do this, and we'll talk about stats later, but then you'll find this interesting character sitting at the bonfire. This is the Crestfallen Warrior. He gives you some advice on the fact that there's actually 2 bells, and says that you're pretty much hopeless, but since you're here, he'll help you anyway. Now, this is where the two paths of our two different players divide. Because our other player, Jack, will actually see this as a challenge and try to beat him at first. Once you attack him, however, you'll realize that he's pretty strong, and killing him isn't really an option. So, our player runs up into the hills to the undead burg and starts his quest off the same as the other does.
What do we have here?
Returning to our other character, she also talks to this man and gets the info about there being two bells. She explores Firelink Shrine for a bit and finds a guy that sells some miracles. Afterwards, she heads up to Undeadburg to start her journey. Because she's chosen the Thief class, she only has a dinky bandit knife and needs to get in either a lot of hits to get a bleed stat going or backstab them for critical damage. This is another big difference between our two playable characters, since Jack has a scimitar, which works more like a conventional sword. After a while, you get this big dragon land near you and then swoop away, but you don't get the chance to attack it. In my opinion, this has been a missed chance. Since you can actually kill this dragon later on in the level, I think giving the player some time to get a few hits in while it swoops away would have given the player the indication that this dragon is actually vulnerable and killable, instead of just some random observing dragon that flies around and murders you all the time.
You seem to have your wits about you.
Both of our characters then meet the undead merchant. They buy some stuff, but Jack realizes he doesn't have enough money to buy what he wants, so he decides to attack him. Now, attacking this merchant seems like a stupid idea, but he is actually rewarded for it, netting him a katana, a very cool and special weapon that he'll use throughout his journey. After a while, the Jack character finds his Black Knight. Now, this is a very interesting challenge, since they expressionally put this knight in a place where you don't have to cross paths with him if you don't want to, but you can challenge him. He's a very proper fighter, so you'll have to outsmart him, dodge his attacks, and roll correctly or block correctly. This is a very nice challenge for new players who get an early grasp at the game and want to try out their skills to a more honed opponent. After a few tries, you get a ring for it. That isn't really useful, but the reward is nice anyway. Plus, the knight has a chance of dropping his weapons, which are extremely strong for the early game. After you climb up the tower, you find yourself in the actual first boss battle. Now this one is interesting, since in the tutorial you've learned that you can jump on top of the boss and get a damage boost. Now there's a bunch of archers on top of the tower you just exited, which you should probably take down before starting the boss fight. The boss itself isn't terribly interesting, but it's a fun challenge, and you can jump down from the archer platform to land on top of him and get a great damage boost. After you've beaten this boss, you meet Solaire. Now Solaire's become kind of a meme, but in Dark Souls 1, he was actually quite interesting. He was this character that was actually quite happy to adventure through this dreaded land of evil and monsters. And of course he explains the co-op system to you to try and get you to do some co-op if you're stuck on a boss. But hey, I like him. Now, when people say Dark Souls is full of bullshit moments, they usually talk about moments like this. Now I do think this is kind of a bullshit moment, since there's no real way you could have seen this coming. But the dragon is going to swoop down and he's going to try to burn you. This is most likely going to happen to every new player ever. The way to avoid this is to run to the side to the little gap on the bridge, but it's not really clear and you don't really have any indication that you should go there. Except for maybe the scorch marks and the burned bodies, but burned bodies aren't anything new, and you know, you haven't seen the dragon in a while, so you've probably forgotten about him. I think if they've incorporated the dragon somehow in the Tower's Demon's fight, by either making him spew fire at one point or just flying over a bunch of times, you would have realized the dragon was an actual threat and that you needed to worry about it, instead of coming in at the beginning of the level and then killing you at halfway point. Once you do get to that halfway point, there's actually a semi-secret way to get past the dragon and to find another bonfire that you couldn't access otherwise. You've got two options. Either you kill the dragon with arrows or a lot of luck and dodging, or you wait for a while and you sneak past the dragon, giving you access to that extra bonfire. The more logical way is to go under the bridge. This will lead you to some annoying rats that can poison you, and trust me, poison is a bitch and hard to get rid of, especially in the early game when you don't have any purple moss clumps. So the difference between our two characters is going to be that one is going to take the lower route and the other is going to take the upper route. Once you get past that, there's another Black Knight to fight. And this one is going to be severely harder for our character Jack to fight, because most of the time he will be poisoned, and having to fight a Black Knight while being poisoned is quite tricky. He succeeds, however, and we continue to the next portion of the level. This is a very interesting part here. You see two archers and a giant boar standing in front of you with a bunch of fires around and a bunch of enemies. If you try to deal with this head on, you'll have no luck. You'll be overwhelmed and you'll get destroyed. The idea is that you first take down the archers and then attack the boar on its own. The boar, however, is weak to fire, meaning that you can lure him into the fire. Or you can take him down from above with some ranged items. There's also a third option for veteran players to take, if they're willing to take the risk. You can run up and jump over to try and get past the gate at the end before it closes, meaning you won't have to fight the boar, and you unlock a shortcut without going to some corridors next. Now, as you'll continue, you'll fight a lot of enemies that have a chance of dropping Titanite. These Titanites are used to upgrade your weapons, and it is not by chance that they are dropped by these enemies. Soon you'll run into a blacksmith. I recommend going there before fighting the gargoyles, as having extra damage on a boss is always useful. There's also one guaranteed Titanite drop. That means that you can always get your weapon to at least +1. There is also your Firekeeper's Soul, which is used to upgrade your Estus Flask to give you more health per charge, although the description on it is kind of iffy. It says can be used to upgrade your Estus Flask, which means most players just use it instead of bringing it to a Firekeeper, which you should do. Before we talk about the boss, we have to quickly mention Lotrak, a knight who is locked up, and he says he'll give you a reward as soon as you free him. Doing so will result in him returning to Firelink Shrine. We'll run into him again later. Now this is a boss I want to talk about, the Gargoyles. The Gargoyles are a very interesting boss. There's two actually. One comes in at half health once you get the other one to half health. Now the key thing to fighting this boss is to make sure you kill the first gargoyle before the second one really comes into action. Though there is some AI tweaking to make sure that the second gargoyle uses mostly just his flame attacks to try to make sure the player is not overwhelmed by something they cannot dodge. Now as you can see, Jack is fighting the gargoyle on his own, and he's used the gold pine resin on his sword to make sure he does extra damage to finish the first gargoyle quicker. This is an excellent strategy to deal with this, and works great if you want to solo the boss. Now on the other hand, new players are going to have real trouble with this boss, since they'll easily get overwhelmed because at halfway there'll be two of them. Now I think they did this intentionally to try and get you to summon for your first boss, to give you a feeling of connection to the other players online in Dark Souls, and to at least try the feature before you just write it off as easy mode. Once you've defeated the gargoyles, it's a slow climb upwards towards your victory. You ring the first bell of awakening, and you feel a sense of accomplishment for what you've done. You feel triumph for the boss you just defeated, and most of all, you feel victorious. You feel like you've done it. You get this cool cutscene to show you that everyone, everywhere, will hear the sound of you ringing bells. And the thing is, in multiplayer, you actually do hear the bells. Other people hear how you've rang the bell. This is a really cool thing and just makes the world so much more immersive. Once you climb down, you'll meet a creepy fella who both our characters react differently to. Our thief, who's recently invested in her faith, welcomes him and she buys a purging stone, while our skeptical knight challenges him or accidentally presses the attack button and defeats him in combat. Our hope character then decides to join the Warriors of the Sunlight and become a Sunbro, allowing her to hurl lightning at her enemies. Now it's time to loop back to the beginning and see who is the rightful owner of Firelink Shrine. I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this, because making this was an awesome experience and I loved it. The next part should be out soon, and I hope you'll enjoy. If you like this, please like and subscribe, rate it, share it, whatever. It helps me a lot, especially since I'm a really small channel. Thanks.